something.
Yeah, he's going to New York and he's going to pull over in order to participate in the meeting. So we'll just keep our eye open, and I'm going to start the video. And I got to turn the video on. Okay, that's pretty good. Awesome, thank you. All right, so you can go ahead and start, and I'm sure he'll join in as soon as he's able.
Okay, this is the Purchasing Protocol Ad Hoc Study Committee meeting at 2 o'clock on October 12th, 2021 in Town Hall. This is a combination of meeting face-to-face as well as Zoom. The notice. Until further notice, the Corporation of Harpers Ferry governing and deliberative bodies will be holding its meetings and or hearings virtually via Zoom webinar, which provides for public participation during the public comment period when applicable and when posting the agenda. Unfortunately, not on this meeting. Alternatively, the public may watch by YouTube, video live stream, or listen by telephone. These options comply with the West Virginia Open Governmental Meetings Act.
Here it is.
And in it, Storm.
Yeah, he just came in.
Okay. In attendance, we have Debbie Kelly, Financial Officer, Chris Craig, Storm, D'Amico, Bill Williamson, Robinson, Mr. Robinson, and Christian Petriconis. And with that, we'll call this meeting to order. Approval, do I have approval of the agenda? I so move. I'll second that. Discussion. Okay, all those in favor? Okay. Start. All right. So we're moving ahead. So let's do the new business. This is the flow chart that Deb has worked on, this discussion action regarding reading over these flow charts for process. I thought they were charts, but they're not. They're flow charts. They're original. That's right. So we'll look over them for process to see if they're appropriate. Yeah. Right. So we'll look that over. Also, Deb did have in her email to us about whether we're going to take care of this just ourselves or we need approval from town council.
Well, I was just trying to get y'all to think about, I mean, town council is going to have to do the whole process, but I was just trying to get you to think about, once we adopt the process, at what point to do it during the process, do we need to get town council involved regarding the various bid levels and regarding purchases that might happen outside of the budget? When does that happen? So what I'm looking at is, we started with that original document about how do we spend money that we feel was outdated from 2015.
Right.
And so our goal was to make these flow charts and then provide pros to go along with it. But the big stumbling block, or not, I don't want to call it a stumbling block, but a big kind of pivot point throughout this is that $500 check that ends up on the town council meeting. And so do we need to redefine that? How do we want to redefine it? Do we want to redefine it as something that happens outside of this? Or is it really something that happens outside of the budget that wasn't anticipated, that might actually in the ultimate end up affecting the budget for a budget revision that council needs to be aware of? Is that when it needs to go before them? So that's what I wanted you to be thinking about in terms of defining that piece.
Personally, I think the $2,500 level, we should be at that level. But
so describe what you mean by that.
I mean, if something's a $1,000 or $1,200 bill, and it's in the budget, I just think those are small. It was like that $100 thing we had last night.
Right. Okay.
And that was in the budget, all that.
Right.
And I would just like to approve it and just move on.
So $100, I think we're all in agreement about. What you're saying, because, so you're saying, let's say I get a bill for, I don't know, whatever, but it's $2,500 purchase, and it falls in within the budget, and it was something that was anticipated to buy in that line item. And so you're saying that shouldn't need to go before council. But let's say that I get a bill for $4,500 and it still is something that falls within the budget. The rest of the purchases that are going to occur for the rest of the year that are anticipated in that line item are not going to throw the budget out of whack, as far as we can tell in that moment. And we followed the bid process here, then do you think that that then needs to go?
That's right, I don't know.
I think,
Particularly for you guys in the water commission.
I think that if we have, and I think we're trying to streamline what goes in front of the town council. But if we engage in the bid process and it's budgeted, I mean, you know, should the water commission, are we comfortable with the water commission spending that? I mean, it depends on who we're talking about. Because if we get to department heads like the water superintendent,
Police superintendent.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level, that leadership level, making that decision for that amount.
But that probably wouldn't be inside of a vacuum though. You know, I mean, if it's $4,500, it probably should have gone through at least the verbal bidding process. And there should be documentation supporting that. And I guess where that comes into, where the who's looking at that comes into play, which we don't 100% have defined here, and that's part of what we're doing in this conversation. It's kind of taking on a lot of tentacles right now, but if you look at bid process level B, when you get your bids in line, you know, who is the last person that says, okay, you've crossed this hurdle, it's okay to buy? At what point, who is involved in reviewing those bids from 2,500 to 10,000, which are verbal, and the ones from 10,000 to 25,000, which are written, and then the big ones? We don't have that's something we need to define. And perhaps by defining that, we will have answered the first part of the question.
Okay. Right.
Sorry to be confusing, but
No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, if it's in the budget, if it's a contemplated expense, then it's already been approved by the town council.
That's right.
And so I think maybe that 4,500, I would say we could go ahead and, if it's appropriately been bid out,
right,
or estimates or whatever level we have to comply with in order to not to satisfy competitive bidding requirements.
The only thing, Bill, is this budget was approved by the old town council. So this new council doesn't even know a lot of,
Well, and I understand that, but that's part of the nature of the beast. I
Right.
think we get around that, because I have a second part to this, is that rather than go through the approval process, I would give in my water commission report, this is what we did, this is how we vetted it, this is how we spent it, so that you're aware.
that's all, right?
And I think that as long as it's out of an approved budget, town council approved budget, it's below a threshold that requires public bidding requirements, and because that's a whole different animal. I think that, yes, we pull the trigger, and I think we add a notice of reporting to the town council requirement that allows people that weren't aware of the prior budget approval to know. It'd be nice to have a history, sort of be able to understand who's spending what way, because that can get out from under us really fast.
And it helps the signers who sign the checks and me improve, because I'm telling you, there's a ton of things that come from water, and I'm like, chemicals, repairs, valves. Oh my gosh! And I just assume.
And some of that's really problematic, and some of that I think because we don't have. Not everyone engaged in making those decisions has a real good grasp of like how business works and how municipal business is handled. And so this process, we're working on all of this to create a system that irons those kinds of problems out. So you're right. And I think if we're keeping you abreast of what's going on.
I feel better. And also I see Chris signs off all the water
Yes.
issues. So then I slash and then put my initials that I,
Mhm.
even though I don't know totally what I'm approving.
I think
sometimes-
Storm has his hand up. We've been ignoring him.
Oh, sorry, Storm. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just as part of this, like, and this isn't a specific concern, but in a process like this, making sure that there is in the procurement process that basically a larger project can't be broken up into smaller chunks that would make it fall under the limit for oversight. So,
True.
but that's a matter of how this policy is developed, and that when expense is brought forth, one of the conditions is, and that, no, this is not a version of stringing where it's just been broken apart to get around oversight.
And that's addressed on each of the bid levels. One of the blocks that you have to answer right out of the gate is, are all payments to a single or multiple vendors for similar or same commodity or service, will that exceed $25,000 in one 12-month period? And that keeps us away from the stringing piece.
It does for commodities, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in all detail, but also to take, a project that is hundreds of thousands of dollars and not necessarily commodities, and breaking it up into those pieces. And again, it is not likely, but it is a moral hazard.
Yeah, but I think we're addressing that in the bid process.
Great.
We kind of started in the middle of that discussion, so maybe if we back up just a little bit to let you know a little bit of the safeguards I've tried to put into place by the editing that I've done over the last week. I sort of came to the realization of wanting to understand more about the difference between procurement and purchasing. And what I learned, and when Storm was in here today, I showed him the little chart that y'all have right here, and this is sort of a rough right there. This is sort of someone's version, but basically what I learned as I researched that is that procurement and purchasing are different animals, but they're also different animals to different people and different organizations. And my goal in introducing this is not necessarily to make us have more restrictions on ourselves, but to just sort of define a little bit more and shift gears, know when to shift gears. And so purchasing, I sort of see as the daily process of buying. You have, so I made a purchase process in these new sets of charts, which says, all right, I've got an item that I need to buy. It's in my current year budget. The first question I have to answer is, does it remain within the budget? Is it not going to blow my budget line on it? If it doesn't, it needs to come up here or with your department head, and you need to find out if you're going to need a budget revision to deal with it. That's the first thing that happens. Beyond that, then you find out, does the pricing that I'm looking at, has it gone through the procurement process of establishing if we need to have pricing set? So case in point is the situation we're going through right now with the chemicals in the water department, where that's one that we probably should have pricing for a whole year from a vendor or a group of vendors. And so does that meet what I'm going to buy? Is it falling into that, or do I need to go back and establish that pricing? And then go ahead and make your purchase with documentation. I want to at some point talk about purchase orders, which we do not use, and maybe we don't need to, but the point is that you need to have documentation with your vendor. Then you receive the product, you get your invoice, and you make sure everything matches, you approve it for payment, and then that comes through the loop up here. And so this is where in the purchase process, if we're following this, we should already be vetting out right away whether or not this item is going to blow your budget line or not.
Right.
And then if it's fitting in the budget, but it's $5,000, now you know that you have to go over here and follow budget bid process B, requiring 3 verbal bids to get going. And so then once you've done all that, the final act on each one of these is to review with the purchasing agency. That's what this block says. So I guess where we are with that is then who is the purchasing agency? Is that just the person who sits in this office? Is that Is that okay? Is that just your department head if it's under $2,500? Is it the department head and the financial officer if it's 2,500 to 10,000, and beyond that it's also budget and finance, and beyond that it's also town council? Is that what we want to say? That's kind of, is that
Yes.
making sense?
No, those tiers make sense to me.
Okay,
And that, I think that's, you broke it down well.
okay. And if we did that, then are we comfortable that we are covering all our bases of examination, and that we're covering ourselves in process, and that all that, we're feeling comfortable when the check comes before you? And there should be, when the check comes before you, especially if it's like a special thing, there should be documentation with it, or you should be able to ask for documentation if it's not there, to say, okay, yeah, we did get bids, here they are, so you can know that.
Yeah.
So are we, you may want to make a motion to the effect that you establish those purchasing agency or approval of the bid process for each of those levels. You might want to make a motion to that effect if that's what you're happy with. But that would then define that for us. And I almost allow us to move forward with having council approve that as a concept.
As our purchasing.
Yeah, right.
And breaking out purchasing versus procurement does make that.
It just makes a little more sense. Yeah. And okay, so that's that piece. I don't want to start moving too far forward fast in here.
I also think that council really, a lot of this is great to be the guy for the nitty gritty, and I'm not sure council needs to approve that everyday work a day level, but if we need to revise the one pager to adjust the thresholds and set those parameters, I think that would
Makes
be what
sense.
the council would need to approve.
Oh,
That's my
absolutely.
opinion.
The process, absolutely. Because
Okay.
what I'm trying to get to now is that we, as you are comfortable with this as a process.
Mhm.
Then what I'll do is make it into more legible flow charts,
Mhm.
and I will create an accompanying pros form that the council will approve, that will replace this animal that we're working with right now. Yeah.
And I think the key thing is I'm sorry, you talked through it, but where the line is where it goes before budget and finance, like that's the one that
Right.
is sort of where there will be more documentation to present.
Right.
And it would
Right.
seem only for the biggest things that would actually need to come directly to council.
Right, and it might be the kind of thing where if budget and finance is approving it at that 2,500 to 10,000 to 25,000 level, that you are then reporting it to council and saying, this is what we've looked at, this is what's moving forward, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think as long as it's within the budget and it's expected, that's okay. If all of a sudden we're looking at a $25,000 computer overhaul that we didn't budget, well, that's not in the budget, and that's a whole nother animal, and that gets tossed out back when you try to go buy it in the beginning, because it's not part of the budget.
Right.
And the other thing that'll get tossed out, which then I think ends up before council at some point, will be your emergency expenditure, which is covered on the second page. But I don't want to jump to that too fast.
Well, so let me make a motion, so we can get this thing done. I move that the purchasing protocol ad hoc committee recommends the procurement/purchasing process flow charts.
Well, right now you just want us to vote on the purchasing process.
You can vote on the purchasing process is good, and then maybe the bid levels A, B, C, and D, and defining the different approving personnel. So level A being approved at the department, level B being approved with the department and the financing office.
Let me pull this one back, and I'll read this stated here in a second here.
You withdraw the
I'm
motion.
withdrawing my
Well,
motion.
perhaps in the spirit of bifurcating these two, theoretically, making these two different processes, let's vote on each separate, because we're going to send the purchase process up the flagpole before other parts, correct?
Well, I think you really
Are
need
we
to
ready to-
examine all this. I think this is an encompassing.
Put it all together? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we don't, I guess maybe I'm premature in this, in anticipating that you need a motion. Maybe that's maybe we wait till the end and say we approve this in its entirety. I guess I'm just looking.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Let's let it rest.
Let's,
But we are doing in this one is we're saying 0 to 2,500, the department head takes care of. 2,500 to 10,000, department head with the financial office takes care of that. And 10,000 to 25,000, it can go to budget and finance, as long as, and of course it will be in the budget, and budget and finance will report it to town council, but not necessarily for approval.
Right.
And then over 25,000, that's level D. That's the one that's going to get into the electronic bidding anyway. And that is one that will go to town council for final approval.
right,
Okay, and all of those are budgeted expenditures.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Anything that is not a budgeted expenditure will end up back with the budget revision on this very first
Yep.
piece.
now the question I had on this first chart is,
Show me the first chart. Yep. Okay.
this one here,
Yeah.
and that is request. I was thinking that the emergency goes in front of the budgeted, because
Well, if you could have an emergency situation that occurs that could also be budgeted.
it could.
And
it
so
can be.
so what I'm thinking is that the emergency sort of falls outside of the budget.
Well, I was thinking like the elevator, is a
Right.
prime example, where we're getting hit with this.
Well, the repair to it really isn't necessarily specifically in the budget. When we were talking about maintenance to the building and such, we were talking about the soffit, we were talking about some other thing that was going to be done to the building, and we put specific amount of money in there.
You did?
And if the last time we had to get that thing monster repaired, it was several $1,000s. So if we had ended up spending several $1,000s, that could have blown our budget line item down the road if we went for the soffit repairs. So that's why I was thinking about it in this term. If we knew that we were going to have to do at some point in the year a $500 upgrade to the elevator, and all of a sudden it broke tomorrow, we would need to do it faster than we thought, but it was already budgeted. That's my thinking there. Is that
Yeah, like basically, something might be budgeted until that budget line has been exceeded, and then anything beyond that is unbudgeted and has to go through the process for getting dollars to it.
right? And the other thing that can also happen within our budget, just as a reminder, we have those main line items that go to the state auditor's office, which the easiest one to think about with that is the city hall line item. That city hall line item includes all of our maintenance to the building, all of our office supplies, salaries of people within that, our OCO, the office coordinator, not the clerk, but those publications, all kinds of stuff fall inside of that.
I get it.
We, as a spending unit, can move those numbers around without talking to the state auditor's office. But if we want to bump that city hall item, that can be a problem. So that's another reason why I feel like the emergency one sort of falls behind. We have a little more give sometimes, and sometimes we don't. Like snow removal. Okay, so let's say we were already capped on snow removal. Here comes another storm. That's an emergency kind of thing, right?
Right.
Okay. I will ask you though, there are some typos with my pen.
Oh, before we move on,
Yeah,
do we have a designated minute taker for this meeting?
Yeah, I'm taking general notes.
Okay,
in this block where it says follow, it said budget process, it should be bid process. I was budgeting and doing bids all at the same time. And then the quick summary is of the bid process. I don't know if you need that designation, but I forgot to.
Could we also, at this line with this 0 to 2,500, can we put in the one for how much we can do? Right now it's like $500 and we have to report to the town council. I really think 500 is just too low.
So that's what we just talked about though.
Yeah.
Go with these level A, level B, level C. Here's how it would run. If we have a purchase between $0 and $2,500, there's no formal bid requirement, then the department head is going to approve that. They're going to sign off on it. You're going to sign off on it. And as long as it is within the budget, meaning it's already past this from the right out the gate, then it's not gonna go to council.
So Chris has to buy $2,500 worth of chlorine from the plant at once. It's budgeted, it's contemplated. He's just gonna do that.
Okay.
Now, as long as he's not, doing stringing, and we haven't, he's attended to the bid process, which that's part of this.
I have a real world one that I'm working on right now with Larry, and that is to replace some of our barrels, trash cans. And so I've been working with a vineyard, trying to buy some in nearby vineyard, and it's $500 for 4 of them.
Wow.
So, and we still gotta get them. But I haven't bought them yet, but
Okay, well, that's a good example to talk through. So that is not something that when we contemplated the budget that we contemplated to be part of what we would be doing in the street budget this year.
correct.
If you're talking about replacing a total of 4 barrels, we don't need to be too worried about that, because probably within our budget, that's not going to be a problem. But you're still now within your $0 to $2,500 range.
Right.
So you're going to start out in this purchase process, and you're going to say, all right, well, how many of these do I want to buy, and how much is it going to cost me, and is it within my budget? If it's not within the budget, then you got to come in here. We got to start talking about a budget revision. And when, how are we going to do that? Do we wait till the next one? Or is it a crisis and we need to go do it in the next month? What do we do? Is there money within that line item that we can kind of move from one raw computer to PayPal so that we can get through to the next revision? That's where we go. That's what I see with that. Does that make sense?
Because it's unbudgeted.
Because it's not,
in the
it's
budget.
not what we thought about. And is it going to be a capital expenditure? I don't know. Are you talking about replacing 25 of them? I mean, that's a chunk of money.
No,
So-
just 4.
Okay, well, but in total,
Yeah,
if it's in total, that's, if you're talking about 10, now we're talking a whole nother animal.
Well, yeah, and basically 4 to 5 would make the difference in our categories, our level.
Right. Is that making some sense?
yeah, I'll talk to you about that one, where it could possibly, it's streets.
Yeah, it's street
It's
materials.
street materials.
right.
So, we need 2, well, actually, we need to replace 2 that are going in Lower Town, and then we're gonna add 2 to the park.
So it's a total of, what did you say? 4 and they're 500?
5 total, $500.
That's $2,000.
No,
it's $500 for 4.
Oh, okay.
That's
So-
25 each.
Oh, okay, so that's level A. That's, as long as we can find the line item that it belongs to, and we're not gonna bust the budget, that's not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah. And then at level B, if it was, let's say you wanted to buy 20 of them,
20.
25 of them, and that puts you over $2,500. Now what's gonna happen is you're gonna wanna get 3 verbal bids. You need to
Correct.
call 3 vineyards and get that kind of thing going on. And that approval is gonna happen between the department head and the financial office. And as long as that looks clean and good and we're not busting the budget, then that purchase will proceed without going to council, according to what we're
Yeah.
talking about. And then if it's over 10,000 to 25,000, then that's gonna be 3 written bids, and that's gonna come before you all. And you will report to council. You will also probably have to use some discretion. There might be times when you might say, you know what, maybe we do want them to approve it, but that's to your discretion, as I'm understanding this. And then over 25,000, that's going to the electronic, that's the big mama, and council takes care of that.
Right.
So that's the way I envision what you're gonna propose to council, and that takes care of removing this caveat and is only bringing to council things that are emergency expenditures, things that are not budgeted. Maybe we decide that even though it's gonna blow out a budget line item in 6 months, we still want to go ahead with it. And so we might take that one to council on a case-by-case basis and say, this is why we brought it to you for final blessing. We will be attending to it in our next revision. I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of hand holding through it that we might make some caveats as we go along.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, it's gonna be, as we implement this, we're gonna be like, this would be better.
If we did this, so it's just out of the gate, you always learn that stuff, but yeah. Is that making sense to you over there, our remote man?
Yeah, I'm tuned in and actually making a little chart to show. So for each A, B, C, D, and then what the process is, if it's bidding, if it's electronic, if it's none, and then the last column who the authority is from department head,
Okay.
finance office. So, yeah.
That's good. That's good. That'll be easy for them to see all on one page. That's nice.
And this is for, of course, only if it's within budget. If it's not, then.
I mean, some of the things I think we need to think about is that, and the council may need to have your perspective on why these dollar amounts are acceptable to us, and this is what we want to work at with. These are the state levels. We're not as big as the state, but we're a lot bigger than we were back in 2015, and we're dealing with a lot more money than we were in 2015. And I want, once we get to the point of doing that, I meant to do it, well, Storm gave me the idea today, but I didn't get back to it. I'll try to provide some numbers about, you know, how much our budget has grown since then, so that first of all, there's more comfort with dealing with how much money we have in our budget, that, you know, just overspending $5,000 on 1 week isn't going to totally screw us up a month from now, where I think that was a big concern back in this day when this more restrictive policy was put in place. So I think these are things that you can present to council and say, this is why we support this. And maybe if there's any discomfort, what you do is you adjust these numbers a little bit so that it's more suitable to Harper's Ferry, rather than it being what the state level is. So you might bring some of those numbers down a wee bit in order to provide,
Well,
if there's discomfort. I mean, I'm just saying,
There's going to be discomfort because, you know,
it's new.
we're humans, but
Yeah.
I think what we point out when that discomfort gets expressed is that we're really talking about budgeted items here.
Mhm.
So these are amounts that we've already accounted for, voted on, and approved spending.
Mhm.
And what we have now that I wasn't involved in 2015, so I'm, you know, assuming here, but we have much more budgetary discipline
Mhm.
than we've had in the past.
Mhm.
And if you're adhering to your budgets and you're paying attention to that, and you have that kind of financial discipline within your whole organization, which we do.
Well, and even along with the discipline, it's also that there are financial controls in place that
Correct.
that discipline extends, because there are policies that are agreed upon that are effectively the law for the town and for these agencies. So
Mhm.
Correct, but that being much more sophisticated in how we utilize our budgets, how we develop our budgets, and all of that makes these dollar ranges more comfortable, because none of these numbers will be new. When when the purchase is made, this has already been, you know, contemplated. So
I do have a question. Like, as far as department heads, does this apply to any budget holder that exists in the budget?
Well, department heads I would define as the police department and the water department.
Okay.
And other than that, the mayor is the department head of the town hall. So I think those would be your three.
yeah, we don't have any. I don't think anyone else really has any purchasing.
Authority, so to speak. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and that obviates the other questions I had. So.
Okay. And we should probably have that in writing as part of our presentation. All right, well, if we're good with that, then there were a lot of other charts that support these basic ones that have to do with the emergency procurement process, when there are situations that 3 bids are not possible, when there are tie bids, when there's a bid error, and the award process, which is really just evaluating your bids and then documenting what you have to
I
say.
like the one on page way in the back that I was,
What's it called?
well, that's
That's the award process.
the work
Mhm.
process, and then the work process to other than the lowest bid. And
Yeah.
I like the idea. I want documentation. It says here documents, agency documents,
Detailed justification signed by evaluators, kept in the agency file with explanation. And from a legal standpoint, you know, if you're going to conduct a bid process, competitive bidding process in compliance with West Virginia state law, say we're doing a construction contract and we have one of these situations where some fly-by-night agency bids $5 less. And they really don't, they say the right things, but we're not comfortable with them, or they don't have the right equipment, or they're subbing out to somebody we don't trust. We are required by law to accept the lowest responsive bid. But there's a carve out there, there's an exception that allows us to make good decisions
Right.
outside of that. If, the lowest bid really isn't the best for the interest of the public, then there's a carve out there, but boy, you better have your ducks in a row. And that's where we do that.
Right. And I've referenced these reference points, page 61, 5.3.1, everything, that all goes back to the state code where there's detail to support that decision making. So you won't just be making off my chicken scratch. If we get to that point, we're going to pull the manual out. We're going to talk about it. We're going to make sure that we do it the way that they want us to do it.
Right, document.
Right. And they all these little descriptors about how and when you can do it, under what conditions, those are talked about in here. So that's what we'll use for our reference point rather than my writing the whole book here.
And when we come across these things, we may want to consider, adopting some version of the state forms they use for,
yeah,
some
we may
uniform
want to
form
do that.
something that, a form,
Right.
Harper's Ferry 222A, where we document that stuff.
Right.
And it has the signatories for the people, so that's something we're used to.
Right. And we also may, particularly with the direct award situation, we may want to put something on the back end of all of these bid levels that if it is a direct award that we get, we make sure that at least there's like maybe somebody from budget and finance signing off with us or something like that. That I'll think about that a little bit just to add us another level of eyes.
Well,
Valid.
and a direct award at the level of requiring written bids, above $25,000.
Right.
I think we probably run our rationale past the town attorney.
Well, over 25,000 for sure.
Right.
That's a good one.
I don't think that the 10 to 25 or the whatever the lower levels. I think we're okay from a legal risk level if we have a good reason to make a direct award. And it's not a difficult analysis, really.
No, it isn't. But it's it is the one where you don't want just two people standing there saying this is okay with me. You want so that's really my main concern then, I guess, is on level B. And maybe even level A, but level B where it's just the financial office and the department head who are saying, yeah, this is the better way to go. Maybe we want to pull in somebody from budget and finance and just say, are you
level A doesn't really trigger this.
level B, if you have to go to a
from
direct
B
award.
forward,
Yeah.
then I think there's
Well,
a sign off from budget and finance.
On level B, it's just the financial office and the agents and
Right.
the department head. Level C already has budget and finance involved. So I would say on level B, if you end up with a direct award situation, then you want to pull in at least one member from budget and finance, review it. If it needs to go up the ladder, then we send it up the ladder.
Right.
Okay.
Does the state code give some specifics like in-state, out-of-state, minority owned? Does it allow specific considerations like that?
There was not.
There's no. I did not see anything, and I think it's worth taking a second look at. But I did not see any carve outs from the process, the competitive bidding process, that allow you to say, well, but I've got this minority or minority owned business that it would really be good for the town for me to send them the business. That's I'd have to look.
I think where you run into where I've seen things like that introduced is like with the ARPA money, where an outside agency is coming in and saying, being the federal government saying, you need to introduce into your bidding process for that, the Title 9, is it Title 6, that has the caveat like that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so to me, that sort of, and again, it's worth a double check, but that sort of seems like it's more like agency driven.
Yes.
And so if we're driving that and we want those considerations, I think that's something maybe the town has to invoke if that's what they want.
But for example, if we're bidding out work that's going to be paid for with ARPA money,
Right.
then
Say that again, Bill.
if we're going to be bidding out work that's going to be paid for with the ARPA money,
Mhm.
then, and in the ARPA carve outs, there are, you know, preferences for minority owned or whatever. I think that trumps I think that gives us cover for deviating from.
This, yeah. But on the other hand, if the town council says, well, we would like, you know, preferential, preferential isn't really what I want to say, but, you know, we'd like as much of our business going to West Virginia owned businesses as possible. Then I would think that that would be something that the town would need to adopt and that we would need to put into our process. And we'd have to have legal counsel to advise us about how to do that and if we can and that kind of thing. Is that making sense?
Yes, it does make sense, but from a practical standpoint,
Particularly where we live.
See, we're right on the border of
Well,
12 states. So it's,
yeah, I mean,
it was like when Mayor Bishop wanted to have something with the Hilltop workers coming, a certain percentage coming from West Virginia.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, how do you even?
Well, regardless of what you want to call that, whether you want to call that, you know, women-based, minority-owned, whatever you want to call that, I think that to my perspective, from what I've seen, that comes from the agency. We're the agency, we would have to push that, have legal review and have it introduced into these.
yeah. I mean, I think that's a good concern. I think those are good things to do. But we would definitely have to, because West Virginia state law doesn't really.
Sort of our problem is we're not getting enough bids.
Deb, is it-
Well, the reality of it is that because of,
With 3 bids.
well, because even though this town isn't particularly rural, we're in a rural environment, and the size of our work is such that, you know, not a lot of people are going to want to travel real far to do it, you know, unless we lump things together. And so, and the folks that have the tools are, you know, most of them are not coming from immediate around here because there's not enough of that kind of work to sustain them. So being locked into West Virginia businesses would be a big hurdle for us from a construction standpoint. And so, you know, but you know, it's something to consider because it would be nice.
But let's make it a secondary consideration.
I'm sorry.
Let's make it a secondary consideration.
Yeah, and Deb, it's already, it's already a note.
No, but that's it. I think in today's world, that's an important.
It is important consideration. I think Storm has a question.
Yeah. So it is, if it's not already a note in your notes, to have a note that says something to that effect, that if there's an outside award or funds that come through that have conditions, that those will need to be, they won't override this, but they'll need to integrate with it.
Okay, so in the procurement piece, I think I need to ask that question is there any outside agency restriction? Okay.
But consider the source of the funds, and are there any, you know, conditions on use of those funds? Because we're, you know, in the next couple of years, we're going to be doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
You hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. Okay. All right. So we talked about the award process. How about the emergency procurement? Are you happy with, I made some definitions on there about what emergency conditions may and may not be. Any questions on that?
I think it was similar to what I had.
It was, I took some of your verbiage and then I used some of it, but I also dropped some of it because it was already addressed somewhere else, so.
I think we have, as far as, I mean, ARPA is not our only, we get grants all the time with the water You know, we have certain pieces of equipment that we have purchased through grants that we can only use for that sort of thing, like the asylum stuff. And then we have, and then the USDA money, you know, the loan is a, you know, has conditions attached. So, you know, having that as part of our analysis is good.
I like the emergency stuff there.
Okay.
If you do not, I never thought of that, but neglected.
Poor planning,
You know, like,
just because
sorry,
you,
that's not an emergency.
because you procrastinated and you haven't done anything about it, doesn't mean that now all of a sudden it's okay to go do whatever you want.
Sludge removal will never be an emergency.
Okay.
Just saying.
Just saying.
Health and safety, to protect town property, repair, rebuild public critical equipment, damage by, you know, storms and things like that.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
It's all good.
All right.
And so is the decision factor on whether it's an emergency or not, does that lie at the given level that we're at, or?
So you are working with the spending threshold between 0 and 25,000. My thinking was if it's over 25,000, it's probably not an emergency. I mean, unless we're in catastrophic situation, in which case probably the whole state's becoming a state of emergency, which has its own release on spending according to the state spending policy. So that's sort of, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after that, so if your spending threshold is under 25,000, then the department head or commission reviews the situation with the mayor and the financial office. If it's determined that a legitimate emergency exists, then the purchase may be authorized by the mayor and reported to the town council. And you'll retain documentation as to why it was an emergency, et cetera. And then you proceed with the purchasing process. If it's determined that this is not an emergency, then you go all the way back to bid process A and get your ducks in a row.
I like it.
Yeah, and emergency purchases over $25,000 are going to be.
Non-emergency.
Oh, yeah.
Or they're going to be catastrophic, at which point we won't have control. Yeah. I mean, even on all the spending that we did with COVID, I mean, we spent a lot of money there, but it was not singularly ever any one line item, that much money without us then revising our budget to accommodate it.
Right.
So that follows that exactly.
But to me, it's a weather event. It's something.
Oh, yeah.
But
Flood of 1936 level.
Right,
stuff.
right. At which time this governor will say you are in a state of emergency, at which time we can probably expect support in finance from the state or FEMA. So there's other things that kick into gear.
right.
Well, and theoretically, I mean, those kinds of things, we don't have the kind of.
We don't
tax
have the
revenue
money
be able
to throw it around, right?
to-
And if
budget for that.
and if it was, and we said, let's say it was $30,000, and we're like, okay, the side of the building falls off or something, and we got it. Okay, then you know what? You do your 2-day town council meeting and get everybody's stuff in here
Yeah,
and deal with it that way.
well, I'm thinking about the big fire, a few years ago, how that would have affected budget needs for the town.
Well, there's a difference between budget needs and emergency needs, though. I mean, there may have been emergency assistance that the town might have wanted to give to them for maybe, I don't know, food, water, or something to help workers who were there, accommodations to people who might have come in from out of town to fight the fire. I don't know. I'm just thinking extemporaneously about emergency versus state-supported funding that came in later, which wasn't necessarily an emergency, but it supported that situation. That's where you're going to go with your budget revision.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So then we've got, let's just hit each one of these independently. You've got your 3 bids. When your 3 bids are not possible, that's page 6, which we will probably deal with a lot. And I may need to shore this one up a little bit more. And there are some little caveats that I have to dig a wee bit deeper into about how to handle this if we think that there's really not gonna be 3 bids available. Sometimes you have to, one avenue is after you've said, okay, there's not 3 bids available. So you have to then post, we are getting ready to make a direct award, and you give it a period of time. And so one of the things that we are gonna need to decide as a group is, what is that posting? What's the legitimate posting of that? Do we need to post it on our website? Can we post it down there? How long is acceptable to us? The state does 10 days out on the Oasis website. So we need to decide what our parameter is going to be here for that. We don't necessarily need to decide that now, but we're going to need to decide that. And I'll try to dig a little more on
I
that.
think electronic ways to do the website.
I was going to say, even if we don't need to go through the whole formal bid process, we can still leverage that platform in order to cast our net wider.
Okay.
And that's if we only get 1 bid.
Yeah. Well, it kind of, it sort of falls in the whole direct award category anyway. What happens if you only get 1 bid is that you are giving a direct award.
Right.
And so procedures followed for direct awards tend to fall into this, that you still need to make public notice that you're about to give a direct award.
Right. But if you have 2 bids instead of 3.
Well, under it all, it's that you need to actually make and show that you made an honest effort to get
Yes.
3 legit bids. And it's not just to prevent, cronyism. It's also because you'll get the best price from that.
The snow bids we just did, two of the contractors declined, and we got emails from them saying that they're not going to do this project.
Right.
Snow removal, crossroads.
Cornerstone.
Cornerstone.
And in the case
I
of
see what you're saying. I'll follow up on that.
And in the case of snow removal, it's pretty clear. It's unlikely you're going to be able to cast the net wider geographically and find someone who would be willing to come to Harper's Ferry to do that. So
Right.
I could get somebody at Atlantic City here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it very quickly becomes cost prohibitive if they have to come from too far away.
Sure, yeah.
Because that's, as important as it is, it's kind of small potato.
Well, that's also hurting you on the water project, how far is somebody can bring in their heavy
Right.
equipment?
well, in fact, they're in the informational discussions with a couple of folks that are interested in the work. They might do that. Like if it's bundled and if it's a large enough thing, it may be attractive for them to bring their whole team up for a period of time. They build in the housing and they would basically live in this region. And they may even see that as an opportunity to establish more business in this region. So it's not crazy that
No, it's not.
from outside of the region could end up here and that we might
Right.
get good results from that.
But on the flip side, it needs to be attractive enough to warrant that.
Has to be enough work.
Yeah.
The dollar amount has to be large enough. And that's what we've run up against, is doing things piecemeal.
Mhm.
Nothing's large enough.
So, okay, so I'm gonna refine a little bit the direct award and the 3 bid thing. 3 bids not possible. How about tie bids? This comes right out of the manual about what you do, the processes, all that kind of business.
Good point, I like that.
But they discuss very much that you have to have a witness and document it, have all the witnesses sign it. So that's all right out of the manual. And again, if we ever came into this, the pages in here, it's refer to the book, there's, yeah. And then the last thing is if there are bid errors. And so this discusses.
Yeah, and I found that when, I got lost on that. Can you take us through that?
Okay, it's been a while since I looked at this, but let's try.
And I take it a bid error is, that the vendor has made a mistake.
Yes,
Okay.
in most cases. And most of the time, in the beginning, I believe what it tells you, it assumes is that the vendor has determined that they've made an error. So let's say they sent a bid in and they're like, oh my gosh, we just found out that we made a big mistake. So the question becomes, first of all, has the bid opening date passed? And if it has, then if it's a pricing error, they have to, let's see, then the unit price prevails. So there's no big, they don't get to say, fix it. The unit price prevails, the agency recalculates the extension of the totals based on the unit price. The vendor original document may not be modified, and the recalculation must be documented and retained by the agency. If it is not a pricing page error, then in writing, the vendor must, within a reasonable time frame, request that the erroneous bid be rejected. And then the bid must determine if all the following conditions exist, and are they proven by the vendor that the error was made, that the error was materially affected the bid, that the rejection of the bid would not cause hardship on the agency other than losing the opportunity to receive the goods and services at a reduced rate. And then enforcement of the part of the bid in error would be unconsiderable. And if all, and the vendor has to specifically identify what the error is and provide documentation and all that kind of business, and say that if you made us run this project with this bid error, it would just be egregious and it would kill us. They have to prove that out, so to speak. Unconscionable is the word they use.
Yeah.
So once all that's been determined, if the answer to any of those things, two of those things is no, then you don't reject the bid. If the answer is yes, then you can reject it and you document everything in the file and keep it with the file.
Well, and often, outside of this, we wouldn't make this policy, but if you find yourself in this debating whether the error has been made, at that point, if you're going to force them to do the work, that may itself be a bad idea. You may make the decision to reject that bid because they want you to, because otherwise you're going to have,
problem on your hands.
well,
They'll find a way.
that's doing work
Right.
that
Exactly.
hates your guts.
Right.
And, and that's, you have to kind of, there's a lot at play. There's a lot to unpack.
Can there be a bid error in the middle of the project? I'm just saying, let's say they're putting pipeline in, everything's going well, they're digging it in, and then all of a sudden they get solid stone and it's for the next 200 yards.
Okay, well, that's not a bid error.
It's not a bid, but I mean, they had bid it, but they
But there are parameters in the bidding process when you're dealing with situations like that handle those conditions.
So at that point, you have a contract.
Yes.
Which supersedes the bid anyway.
Correct.
Right.
Because the parties have negotiated a contract, and the contract should address expected conditions versus,
Okay.
And in the bid process, I think this is here to be a check against anyone who might try to lowball just to get the contract. And they might be like, oh no, we lowballed it too much, and come back and say, oh, we need to raise it because,
correct.
or lower it, whatever they,
And when we negotiate contract with those folks, I mean, usually most form contracts in the construction realm anyway, address those kinds of unexpected conditions. And we had this come up on the contract down at the plant with the upper sedimentation basin. And they were, it had to do with how much sludge removal should have been expected by a reasonable contractor signing on to do this work, with the facts surrounding, and it was only, like this deep, and they didn't really want to do it. But if the contract addressed that, and I raised that with them, and we got that sorted. Now, the sludge in the lower sedimentation pits is absolutely beyond what would be expected. See what I mean? Yeah. So those kinds of things. So if we get down the road here and suddenly the price of the pipe contemplated in the bid doubles because of circumstances beyond the vendor's control, we address that. That's change order. Or and then we renegotiate, you know, those terms, so that the contract controls those kinds of problems.
And sometimes with, like, when we looked at the Elk Run bid, sometimes those things, specifically what you're saying, like when they run into rock, they accept a certain amount of, they say, okay, we've built in the fact that we might run into rock.
Correct.
That's, I forget there's a term there, but they use that term.
Rock clause.
Maybe so. But that is sorted with the contract most likely.
We didn't have those in Florida.
Sinkhole
Alligator
clause.
clause. But no, and you're correct. In fact, most of these contracts, the bids, even at the bid stage, when they agree to submit their bid, they're contemplating that their engineering may be in the wrong place because of unforeseen things like rock. And we had that with the Elks Run. Location has been moved because boring through solid rock where it was originally laid is absurdly expensive and is bad for the equipment. You know, we go through drill bits, and those, you know, you're talking about drill bits as big around as a dinner plate. So we don't want to buy any more of those than we have to. So those kinds of things happen all the time, and they contemplate that. And often it requires some re-engineering, but
sometimes it works in their favor.
Yeah, but they've also built into their fees and costs that kind of.
Well, let's say we had 3 bids and we got 2 bids are kind of in line with each other and one is really low. And granted, I think we should probably look at that bid and see if there's an error in that bid.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, you should look at all the bids that way.
Yeah.
All of it. Every bid you look at, you should review with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that, and that's why we use a form. So the things are in the place we expect.
Because the error could go the other way too. They could have an extraordinarily high one and they could just made a math error.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's standardized so that we're always comparing apples to apples, and it's easy to spot errors when you have it in all.
I'm just saying, we would go back to that vendor and say, hey, you may want to relook at your numbers.
Yes, and there is, I think that I saw something about how to deal with that. I'll look a little deeper, but I think there is something in the code about how to deal with that if you spot something. Yeah.
And then this is ahead of things. That is something that the electronic bidding platform does allow for, is for doing changes.
Okay, good. All right. So if we're in general happy with all these things, we don't necessarily, I don't think I was premature in offering up a motion. I don't think we really need to do that now. Let me further refine, try to get it into prose, get the last of our questions dealt with, and then we can approve it as one package.
I think if we present this as a finished product to the town.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think because we have a decent chunk of town council involved.
Yes.
I don't see this as being terribly controversial.
Right.
And I think it will tick the boxes for some of the other personalities involved. You know, people will find this appealing.
Well,
I think we've asked the questions that the other council members would ask and raise the issues that would be of most concern, which is mostly if we don't have direct oversight, being certain that there is, you know, a written policy that must be followed that provides the same checks, since town council is not providing that, and that town council is still involved at a certain level. So I think that it won't be controversial for that reason.
Yep.
and I think we're going to be way more transparent about our whole process. And that's got to be good to the residents of the town, knowing that we are responsibly spending your tax dollars in an appropriate manner. And I don't know how many people watch our stuff online.
Doesn't take but one reporter paying attention to, and you know, the goal should always be transparency. And I think that our efforts here are a testament to that desire.
Well, and not only paying attention, but misinterpreting something that they've heard, you know, and so we have the process to back us up. And if we're documenting as we should be according to this, that, you know, takes care that kind of thing. Yeah.
And every step along the way, even the case where there's a direct award, there's documentation. So
Right.
it's saying this is why,
Right.
so
Right.
that it stands up to scrutiny.
Right. Okay.
So we're done with this.
I think we're done with this
Yes,
unless
we're done.
anybody else has any more questions. Whew.
Okay, let's move on to the next item. Very good discussion. Very good.
And thank you for.
Yeah, thank you for your.
Yeah, this is really great, Deb.
Yeah.
Thanks, you're welcome.
So the next one is approval of minutes from September 16, 2021. I had to look them up again. Chris did a nice job. He submitted them in on an email to us. Now, I didn't put it in as an attachment for our meeting. I'm sorry. But I read through it and it looks fine to me. I don't know if everybody's seen it, but Chris had it. It's in an email from what's the date on this thing?
And I resent it today.
Oh, you did? Oh, well, Charles looking for the old one. So as everybody's kind of looked at it, I move that we approve the minutes from September 16, 2021. Second. And discussion? Any changes on it or anything? No? Okay. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous. Okay.
And, now I did have two older August sets of minutes. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Yeah, August 5th and August 18th.
Let's try to get those.
I think I just sent those out at the same time earlier and I resent them today.
That's
I don't know, are we allowed to approve those without the specific date being on them?
You're supposed to have it listed.
Yeah.
We'll just put it on the next one.
I'll get it on the next meeting.
Okay.
Or when you do this meeting, resend them to me as a reminder. We need to approve these on the next meeting, which we need to decide a little bit when that's going to be.
I know.
Yeah. Well, now somebody will take us to task. We don't do it right. Okay, old business, discussion action regarding the updating the person part, but that's pretty much what we've been doing. Yeah. And then the final thing is discussion on the new online bidding system with InfoTech.
Yeah. So I think everybody was on the email from Infotech that there are a series of training sessions to get us started. And when last we spoke, we were going to use the Elks Run project as the starter project. So really at this point, we just need to determine who should and wants to do that training and get back to them and figure out when. Oh yeah, definitely. I think Deb and I might as well, just so that we have multiple people who really know how it works and work through it together. And if you didn't read the email, I'm actually a little. It's a little dry, but it's kind of exciting at the same time that it really does look like they want us to really understand how it functions. That first there's a general 2-hour session on how it all works, but then there are like live fire exercises where they set a bid up and you actually walk through the process, and it bodes well too for when it's actually time to do the bids. It won't be completely unfamiliar, but that we'll have the language of how it's done with them in getting support. So, and it's been signed off, or we have approval from the mayor to go ahead with it. So, so I guess maybe I can just send around a doodle, or Deb, if you could send it around just to see when it will work.
Okay,
Now, who do we want to have trained for this?
well, I'm gonna be bringing the bid, so.
I will go taking it for me.
I think,
I have to be trained for it.
yeah, for certain, anybody with department level authority that would be utilizing this tool should definitely. And you know, Deb, I don't want to put it all on you, but if you feel it'd be the most efficient to have you be the point person from here on, I'd be comfortable with that. If you'd like me to continue to be the point person with the vendor, I'm happy to do that too.
Well, for this, at least for this first meeting, let's let you do it since you've been talking with them, and then let's see where we are after that. And I'll do a doodle poll. But I'm not sure that, do we want any of anybody else? Do any of you want to get involved in it, Christian?
Not crazy about it.
Okay, so anybody involved with the mayor, I don't think we need the mayor.
I don't think you pull in any department heads till we decide this is really.
Right, I mean, I would offer the suggestion that, Bill will represent the water, and Storm, you can represent the general fund side if we would need to utilize this.
I'll probably email all of town council, mayor, recorder, and 5 members, just to say, hey, this is happening. If anybody
Right.
wants to be part of this training, let us know. I think it's very unlikely that anyone would.
Okay, sounds good.
I would be okay on the info. I don't want to be in on the tech.
But I think that the people that'll be utilizing this most are probably in the immediate future. And it just becomes something that, we get to the point where we're using it broadly, then we can start sharing that with.
Yeah, I mean, if this isn't really that as user friendly as we think it might be, and we can use it for a written bid platform, for just whatever, that's really cool. But I think we can do some more training, Lynn.
Yeah. It would be exciting if it does allow us to reach vendors for some projects that we would not otherwise reach.
Right.
That's gold for me, because we really need to be able to throw a wider net, and the spirit ain't it.
It's a fine net, it's just not terribly wide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think we could have gotten, like our snow vendors to do it at that level, would they have?
That's a tricky one because proximity is so very critical. But maybe, maybe there's some around here that we don't know about that, I don't know.
Well, there are in 2 directions. There are people with plows that, are just people with plows. And I might end up being a person with a plow, so we'll talk. But and then there are companies that have large fleets of trucks that, if they're not getting significant snow in, Philly or Pittsburgh or, places that are drivable from here, and we have a really big storm down here, where we're predicted to get a really exceptional snowfall, those kinds of folks might, so those things happen. But yeah, it's doubtful, because that's a pretty local.
Well, they could park equipment in the area. Cornerstone already does that. They park a Bobcat in fact. They don't always use it, but.
And sometimes they use the national parking lot. It's good if they've got all 3 contracts. It does really make for a very efficient for us too.
Well, they'll be out here for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, economies of scale. We can, and to the extent that we can coordinate with our, with Bolivar and with the park, and leverage those relationships. Honestly, it seems, looking at it when I first got here, it's hard for me to understand how the 2 towns really, other than the line drawn between them in 2 separate governments, from a practical standpoint, a utility standpoint, just one place. So
well, I think part of it is that there's not an awful lot of, excess administrative capacity to coordinate.
Correct.
For sure, that would be nice to be able to do it more.
I think we're headed in that direction. I think that's with the Water Commission seat. I think that's sort of beginning to build that sort of, more of a partnership.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so let's talk about the next meeting. We're looking at November. So Deb, you're kind of heavy on this, so it's up more what's going on your schedule. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, yeah, let's try for the first week of November. Because it would be nice to be able to get this in front of council. What's happening on the second?
The second is election day.
Yeah, let's try for the second.
It'll be the second.
No, the second's a Tuesday. Let's try for the second. And, yeah, I'll try to get things,
Should we do 2 o'clock?
Two again?
yeah, that's what really
Two
works well
now.
for me.
Okay. I'll get the agenda going and.
Right now, put down August 5th and August 18th minutes.
And
And today,
today,
And what, 16 and?
Eight, 5th and 18, I think you said,
8/18, 8/5.
and 10, 12.
That's 12 minutes. Next.
All right.
All right,
Very
now we'll
good.
move that we're done with our meeting.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn, I like that.
All right. Thank you, Storm.
Thank you.
All right, thank y'all.
Have a safe trip.
Thank you. Business.
Bye.